Story 1. Back in the early 90s, I got a gig working as a front-of-house sound engineer on a major 10-day music and arts festival in London's Docklands, with some 15 stages dotted all around the waterfront. All of the crew working the stages were either experienced theater techs and/or had loads of experience working major outside events, which is the reason we were hired. As an aside, this festival was to celebrate the culmination of a massive investment in the redevelopment of this area of East London, itself the former site of one of the largest dock complexes in the world. I was tasked with running faux sound on one of the largest stages. Normally, events like this are loads of fun to work, but within 2 days it became apparent that the organizers had no idea of how to run major outside events and had not the faintest idea of how to book acts and schedule the same. In particular, we also had to contend with some woman from Docklands' middle management team who had been given the job of overseeing our particular stage. A person who not only had rapidly proved to be totally ignorant of any aspect of managing outside events, but also someone for whom the word entitled had been invented. Our stage was licensed to run events from midday until 10 p.m., but we rarely had a full day's worth of events for punters to enjoy, due to the aforementioned incompetence with booking. Still, not our problem, we'll just work with what's given to us. On Thursday, we had scheduled an evening of old-time Victorian music hall, which featured, as a special guest, a very famous film and TV actress. Her performance rider required a grand piano. For some unfathomable reason, and again due to the incompetence of the organizers, the piano, a full-size Yamaha concert grand, arrived from the hire company on Tuesday. This was a remarkably stupid idea for any number of reasons. Due to operational considerations, we had to store the piano in the backstage area, where it spent 2 days suffering in the heat of the day despite our best efforts to shield it. As any piano technician tuner will tell you, this is an extremely bad idea, especially with an instrument worth close to £100,000. Almost as bad was the fact that our area was little more than a roughly graded building site. The ground was covered in hardcore rubble fragments around the size of hen's eggs, very uncomfortable to walk around on, even with proper work boots, which also kicked up loads of dust and other detritus, not the sort of crap you want floating about gumming up the works of a very expensive concert grand. Now let me properly set the scene. It's midsummer, very hot, and our venue is a large circus-style tent with around 800 seat capacity. The cast of the show, along with our August star, were due to turn up at around 1 p.m. to conduct a production rehearsal, so we could sort out sound and lighting cues for the show. The main cast duly turn up on time, and we start sorting out their technical requirements. Pretty simple, and nothing that we're not used to. At about 1:30 p.m., our star turns up sporting dark glasses and an immaculate couture. As anyone who's worked in this industry knows, the initial interaction with a list star vis-a-vis their technical requirements can go one of 2 ways: full Monty Diva, or let's go with what we have. Her first demand was that the piano be dropped off the front of the stage so that she could maintain an eye line while standing right downstage, both with her pianist and with the audience. The stage was about 4.5 feet above ground level, and would have required at least 8 burly lads to safely shift a full-size concert grand off the deck. Also not a good idea since it had been tuned that morning, and moving it would have almost certainly caused the tuning to go out of whack. I delicately pointed out that doing so would be in direct violation of both health and safety, and fire regulations as per our written policy, as it would have put the piano in both the fire lane and close to one of the primary emergency exits from the venue. Thinking rapidly, I then suggested that we place the piano as far downstage as physically possible, and that she page herself 3 or 4 feet upstage so that she could still glance over and take cues from her MD, while still taking in the audience. The tension was palpable. After a few seconds' consideration, she replied, "No problem, I can work with that." Phew! No sooner than this crisis had been averted than the Docklands rep rocked up. I remind you, gentle reader, that this person had absolutely zero knowledge about how to run an outside event. She had also been a major thorn in our side for the previous week, trying to micromanage proceedings in the venue in order to big herself up in front of her bosses. We, of course, completely ignored her suggestions, but in such a way as made her think she was in charge. Trust me, she wasn't. She had also been inexcusably rude to virtually every single member of the crew from day one, and had over the days previous reduced several of them to tears. Production crews don't take kindly to our own being treated in such a cavalier fashion, and while we're generally fairly thick-skinned, there comes a point where we want to get our own back. Believe me, after a week of constant abuse, we were coming up with creative ways of disposing of the body. Although we didn't realize it at the time, our savior was at hand, but I digress. Obviously starstruck, she announced in gushing tones that she would be taking personal charge of our star's every need, and that we were not to concern ourselves with that aspect. Indeed, we were to keep our place, as we were only the hired help. Our stage manager, who was at that time sweeping the stage, bridled at the suggestion and made it as if to use his broom to beat the brains out of this woman. I had to step in front of him as unobtrusively as possible and stop him from burying the woman right there, and then, "She ain't worth it, mate." She then swanned off, leaving our star slack-jawed in amazement. She then turned to me and said, "Is that woman for real?" I replied, "Darling, you have no idea," at which point she laughed uproariously. I gave our star a brief summary of the previous few days' farrago, and instantly, she became one of us, and from then on we were all on first-name terms. We then ran a full tech rehearsal from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., sorted out all our cues, and then repaired to the beer tent with the cast for a spot of late lunch and a drink or two. The show was scheduled to kick off at 7:30 p.m. At around 6 p.m., the harridan reappeared to overlook the situation. She noticed that we had all the sides of the tent raised in order to get some air flowing through. Remember, it's midsummer, and it's currently low to mid-80s. She then demanded that all of the tent flaps be lowered because she wanted a more theater atmosphere, and the light spilling through the side walls would spoil the effect. Despite pointing out that dropping the tent sides would significantly raise the temperature in the venue, she demanded the sides be dropped. So despite our earnest advice to the contrary, we reluctantly complied. At around 7 p.m., we saw 8 50-seat coaches arrive. To our amazement, out from the coaches came an entire flotilla of old-age pensioners, many on Zimmer frames, who proceeded to shuffle their way into the tent across the hardcore rubble underfoot. We discovered later that the organizers had forgotten to advertise the event anywhere seriously, and in desperation, had gone around to all the local Darby and Joan clubs a couple of days before handing out free tickets and laying on transport in order to have an audience. So now we have 400-odd opes frantically fanning themselves with anything to hand as the temperature climbs ever higher. We start the show. Everything's going fine, but the mercury in the thermometer I have strapped to the faux rack is slowly going up and up. It's so hot up at the sound desk that I'm down to my shorts. By the end of Act 1, the temperature had gotten up to around 94 degrees Fahrenheit, and one could clearly see the old dear were in a bit of distress. Naturally, the organizers had neglected to provide water for the public, and judging by the horrified expressions of the 2 St. John's ambulance first aiders stationed either side of the stage, things were about to get a lot worse. I climbed off the tower, found the rigging crew, and ordered the sides of the tent raised. No sooner had I done so than our friend, standing nearby, demanded that the sides stay down because she was in charge and my instructions are to be followed absolutely, no questions. It was at this juncture that diplomacy went completely out of the window. I informed her in no uncertain terms, and employing a fair amount of Anglo-Saxon vernacular, that it was in fact the crew who had the responsibility of ensuring the health and safety of all the people in the venue, not her, and that we have the legal authority to enact any procedure that we see fit at any time to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone present. I then informed her that I was now exercising my authority under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 to remediate the situation, and that if she made one single attempt to circumvent that authority, I would have her ejected from the venue without hesitation. She then got in my face and screamed, "I'm in charge. No strike 1, no strike 2, instant strike 3. I looked over at 2 of our security crew who had been hovering in the background with huge grins on their faces, who then stepped up either side of her. Defeated, but complaining like a banshee with a terminal case of hemorrhoids, she was escorted off the premises in short order. By the time Act 2 kicked off, we'd gotten the temperature down to a more manageable low 70-degree F, much to the appreciation of our audience, and the rest of the show went off without a hitch. After the show, cast and crew including our August star returned to the bar for a well-earned drink. Moments later, you know who appeared and in imperious tones informed us that our star was to be the guest of honor at a VIP reception for the various Docklands bigwigs. With a tinge of regret for having our fun curtailed prematurely, we said our goodbyes to our star. Now it gets interesting. Not 10 minutes later, she storms back into the beer tent with a face like absolute thunder. Taken somewhat aback by her reappearance, we inquired as to why she had returned. That woman, she drags me off to this so-called VIP party. I get there and all there are 2 plates of curled-up ham sandwiches and 2 boxes of cheap wine from Sainsbury's. How did she get this job? I gave her a right bloody earful and came back here because I'd much rather drink with you guys. At which point she calls the barman over and orders a round for the entire crew. We spent the rest of the evening chatting away like old friends. She regaled us with stories of her life, and she was gracious enough to listen to some of ours. Despite us trying to buy her a drink, she refused point blank and picked up the entire bar tab for the rest of the evening on the basis that you've had to put up with that evil witch all week. The least I can do is get you folks a drink. All good things must come to an end, and at the end of the evening, her chauffeur turns up to take her home. She embraces all of us as old friends. She hugs me, plants a big kiss on my lips, and thanks me, whereupon I comment, "You have just fulfilled a boyhood dream." Again, that uproarious laugh. She looks at me and says, "Don't let that witch get you down. Leave it to me." I later discovered through the back channels, some weeks later, that our Bête Noire had been fired from her 5-figure job for her monstrous screw-up. Primarily because our star's agent had ripped the organizers a new one in very short order. You do not screw with someone of our star's track record without there being consequences. So, although we were not directly responsible for the Harridan's demise, we were gratified to have someone of our star's caliber standing up for us. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Story 2. So when this happened, I was in 8th grade. I was 5'8" and 150 pounds. I did wrestling in 6th grade and went to a different sport in 7th grade, resulting in an injury that brought me back to wrestling. I was a decent wrestler, not good but not awful. My wrestling partner was an absolute jerk. He would complain when I did the move right, and when I tried to help him with something, he would not comply. My brother and I have had problems with this kid following us and calling us slurs and names with his other friends, who were also douchebags. One day I was carrying my instrument home like any other day. I was walking to my dad's. It's a violin, and the case is a longer and boxier case, when this kid and his other jerks came running towards me and my younger brother. This is how the interaction goes. "Kid, your barrel is hanging out," the douchebag said. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked irritably. "Keep your axe concealed, jerk." Ack is a gun type, and keep in mind that this is during the time when there were a lot of school shootings, and the year before we had trouble with bomb threats and shootings at the school. "This ain't a gun, it's an instrument." "Oh yeah, you're probably keeping mags and ammo in your bag. See, they're pointing it out." "Shut up, kid. You'd probably mistake a pencil for a Glock." He shouts across the street to the other crowd of people, "Hey, look out, this kid is a school shooter." His friend joins the taunting and harassment on the walk home, calling me a school shooter and more about not letting my kind in America. I am a large mix of French, Native American, Irish, and Canadian, so I look like a mutt with tan skin, a large nose, and hair that gets redder when there is more sun for some reason. By this time, my brother had run off because he doesn't do well in social situations like this. These interactions happen a lot, and they even happened in the fall before the wrestling season even started. But this interaction crossed the line. The revenge. The plan. Remember how I mentioned I was a wrestler? He was my wrestling partner and talked a lot of smack. and I just didn't want to deal with him. I planned to make him as embarrassed as possible, no matter what I had to do. The big state tournament was nearing. If I could make this kid learn, this would be the best way to do it there. He was in my weight class and was not that great of a wrestler, so I prepared for the possibility that I would wrestle him, not using him as a partner, but using my friend Jay. He was confused at first, but I told him the plan, and he was on board. I practiced with Jay. He was a couple of weight classes above me, and I got better at wrestling in that period, preparing myself for the tournament. The day of the tournament. We got to the high school where this tournament was held. There were a few mats, and the brackets were being set up as we were warming up. We went into our normal routine and prepared for the usual big tournament spiel. I had checked the brackets, and I saw that douchebag had to lose a match in order for me to be able to wrestle him. He was against a really good kid and obviously lost, and I wrestled my match and lost in order for the plan to come into play. This is a double elimination tournament, so if you lose 2 matches, you are eliminated from the tournament. This was the first of 8 rounds, and he would be out of the tournament if he lost. Oh, and did I mention that the kid's parents and friends were there, also putting me down with more slurs and school shooter nonsense? The match. Disclaimer: there is a lot of wrestling terminology, and I will answer any questions in the comments. These were 1-1 matches, meaning that all of the periods were 1 minute long in high school, and college the matches are 2, so only 3 minutes to deal with this kid. In the first period, we were neutral, and we didn't score any points on each other. That was our stronghold position, and I wasn't surprised. In the second period, he had the bottom position, and I wasn't fast enough to break him down, so he got the 1 point from escape. We were back in neutral, so nothing else happened. In the third period, I was on bottom, so I did a quick reversal, and now that he was on bottom, I got the 2. I rode him out and ended up cradling him for another 3 backs, making the score 5-1. I got him into a ball and chain and turned him for another 3 backs, 8-1. I won the match, and I saw his parents scream and throw the flowers they were holding on the floor because their son got dead last in the bracket. I guess they expected him to do well in a big tournament as a relatively new wrestler. He swore at me and kept screaming as I walked the bout sheet to the front desk. Let's just say that he didn't call me a school shooter or a coward French boy again after that. I wonder what people will think about this when he comes up to the high school next year, when I'm a sophomore. Story 3. Background: about 20 years ago, I worked for a company that made software for banks and credit unions. 2 smaller regional banks merged, and we were called in to upgrade all the branches for the same version of software, and to point the network to the new consolidated bank. This happens after hours so as to not interfere with day-to-day operations. The process started with a meeting to go over the plan for the branch so the bank staff, some of whom would be helping with the process because my team doesn't have complete access to the bank's systems. This is a small bank. There's 4 offices, a conference room, and space for like 5 tellers up front. It turned out it was payday for some large employer or something. But just as I started my meeting with the branch manager, the 2 staff from my company, and the 2 bank employees who would be opening the bank, the following day, the bank started to get really busy. The meeting lasts about 30 minutes, and all the while the line and waiting area is filling up, so I rush through the details for the bank manager and release him. Then the 2 opening staff. I leave the details for my team for last. My team knew the process. They just needed to know what computers to start on first. Anyway, I dismissed the bank staff, and they went to help the rush up front, and I continued my meeting with my team. Then sent them out to get some food since it looks like the bank might not close on time anyway. I head over to the bank manager's office, and immediately a woman ducks under the rope line and makes straight line for the office and tries to follow me inside. I didn't see her step out of line, so I at first thought maybe she was a bank employee. As soon as I turned around, she said something like, "It's about time, I've been waiting for half an hour." This was nonsense because we started the meeting at 4:30 and it wasn't even 5 o'clock yet. I tried to tell her she was mistaken. I don't work at the bank, but she cut me off, not even paying attention to what I was saying. She plopped herself down in one of the chairs and said, "I need to make a withdrawal." I replied, "Sorry, I can't help you with that. You'll need to wait in line." "No, I've already waited for an hour. I know you can do it. You've done it before." She slaps her ID and bank card on the desk and says, "Just open the drawer and give me $2,000. I can't. I don't. I couldn't even finish explaining I don't work there. "Nonsense. You've done it before. Give me $2,000. I can't." That's it. At this point, she's raised her voice and is now standing. I assumed she was going to leave and I went to open the door, but she pushed me back and yelled, "I'm not leaving this office until you give me $2,000. She then picked up a screwdriver out of the toolkit sitting on the desk and started prying at the desk drawer. I push her back, and she swings at me with a screwdriver. I step back, but she scratches my arm, tearing my shirt, and goes back to prying at the drawer. I've had it at this point. I'm thinking she's nuts and I need to do something. I look out the office, and it looks like everyone is busy and think maybe they didn't notice her yelling. It looks like she's not making any progress on the desk. It's too sturdy. I try a calmer approach and try to get her attention. She stops for a moment and looks at me like she forgot I was there. "Are you going to get me my money or what?" she snapped. "I'm not an employee of the bank." "Nonsense. You were just in the meeting with the other employees." "Yes, but—" "Then get me my money or get out of my way." She interrupted before pushing me again. I finally had it. I looked out the window, and it seemed like all the bank employees were calm and quiet. I thought, I'll be damned if I'm just going to stand here and watch her rob the bank. She was a big woman, but I played hockey against bigger people, so even if she had a few pounds on me, I was pretty sure I could at least slow her down. I took a step back, brought my shoulder down then with a step and a short lunge. I checked her into the brick wall behind her. She smacked her head on the wall and gave a short whumph as I knocked the wind out of her, and then she collapsed to the floor unconscious. I watched her suspiciously for a moment, thinking that was easier than I thought. Why didn't I do that earlier? Then I thought, maybe I hurt her, so I knelt down to check on her. She was breathing. I shouldn't move her. The screwdriver flew across the office, so I just stepped over her and walked out into the bank. About that time, I heard sirens, lots of them. A short while later, some police came into the bank. Having just assaulted a woman, leaving her unconscious, I put my hands up. The police walked over, looked at me, then walked into the office. I turned around and the bank staff were pointing at the office where I just left. Evidently, they triggered the silent alarm as soon as she yelled at me to give her money. They moved the other customers to the conference room and were following protocols to comply and not interfere. The end result was she woke up to being handcuffed. She was seen by an EMT briefly before being arrested for armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. The screwdriver from the toolkit was taken as evidence, and we teased my tech for the next few years. "You get your screwdriver back yet?" She came in for $2,000 and left with $510. She spent 4 years in prison. As a victim in that state, they notified me when she got out. Story 4. Overall, it wasn't the best thing to witness, but at least the karma that flourished that day was so damn satisfying. It all started in a store. I went there with my husband to pick up a few things before we headed back home from work. He normally picks me up from my workplace, then we head home together. We entered the store, my husband picked a cart, and we started pushing it into the detergent aisle. As we approached some shelves, I noticed a nice-looking girl wearing sunglasses and carrying a cane waiting around by the end of the aisle. It didn't take me long before I realized that, well, she can't see. She was in fact blind. At this point, I didn't know if she was doing her own shopping or waiting for someone there, but as I was ready to keep wondering about all of that, my husband's voice brought me back to the present and asked me if I found what I came to this aisle for. So, I refocused on our mission and started looking for our detergent. Then all of a sudden, a Karen-looking banshee walks into the aisle, passes the blind girl, gives her a stink look on her way, then tries to reach out for a certain product on a higher shelf. She was too short to easily do that, and it was obvious for us both that this wasn't going to end well, and before my husband could go offer to help her get her product down from up there, the detergent bottle she was after fell over and spilled all over the floor. Surprisingly, the sound of the bottle hitting the floor was way louder than I thought, and clearly it attracted a nearby store worker. The worker arrived, took a look at the liquid spilled all over the floor, then looked up to Karen as to ask her, "What happened? Who was responsible for this?" He didn't really say anything out loud, but it was clear what he was confused about. But before the guy could say anything, Karen went from being hesitant a bit to extremely sharp. She raised her head as if she got a brilliant idea, pointed her mad gaze at the poor blind girl, and raised her finger towards her, then started yelling that this stupid girl was the one that knocked over the detergent and created this entire mess. It wasn't hard for the worker to actually believe this, as it was kinda obvious that the girl is blind, and that she could have knocked that over by mistake due to her condition. It actually makes sense. Then she decided to take this tirade to another level by grabbing the girl's arm in a way that apparently hurt the girl and caused her a lot of pain. She was yelling that she will help the worker drag her butt to the manager's office so they could charge her properly for what she screwed up. Then I decided to finally speak up and tell the worker that this trash of a woman was the one responsible for knocking that detergent bottle over, and that the poor girl had absolutely nothing to do with the mess on the floor. I yelled at her directly to let go of her arm, as she was clearly hurting a disabled person for no reason whatsoever. It seemed that yelling at her triggered a much worse reaction in her little rat brain, and she again decided to direct her rage toward the poor girl in her captivity, accusing her of faking being blind and that she was the one responsible for all of that mess. Then she looked at me and screamed, "What? Did she really fool you with these pathetic sunglasses she's wearing? How naive could you be? You know what, observe." Then she reached out with her hands and grabbed the girl's glasses, then told me, "Look, do these eyes look blind to you? Pathetic." She then snapped the blind girl's sunglasses in half, threw them on the floor, then turned around to leave. BTW, I forgot to mention that this mad Karen was actually wearing glasses herself, normal ones, and the reason I decided to mention that little detail is that I felt that you needed to know that these were the last moments of her wearing those exact glasses ever. Because as she turned around to leave the scene, she was violently met with a stunning fist to her right eye that smashed these glasses of hers into little shreds and sent her body flying to the shelves behind her, while most of the products fell over her and gave her a nice clean up. The irony was insane at that moment. I mean, a filthy person like that needed an entire shelf of detergents to clean them up. Hilarious. And yeah, turned out, the golden fist came from the blind girl's mama bear. She was clearly outside the store when all of that happened and only came back to find her daughter being hurt by this trash of a human being. As I learned later, after she got into the store with her daughter earlier, she realized that she had forgotten her purse in her car, asked her girl to wait around this spot till she ran back to the car, grabbed her purse, and came back really quick. Of course, police were called and, well, an ambulance too, since Karen was clearly knocked out under this big pile of detergent bottles. CCTV footage was pulled out and the cops took our statements regarding what actually happened as witnesses. Karen then was cleared by the paramedics and we started to hear her loud voice shrieking from a couple of aisles away, then eventually saw her getting dragged in handcuffs outside the store and to the back of a police car. The blind girl was in no way in a good condition, and her mother seemed to have slight pain in her knuckles, but thankfully it didn't seem serious. After the cops left, she actually approached me and my husband and thanked us for sticking up for her daughter, and that she's angry enough to pursue this woman's butt to the very end till she makes sure she's behind bars for a long time. I really wish them both the best and hope the poor girl will shake off this horrible experience as soon as she can. Story 5. A bit long, sorry. As I've said in other posts, I'm a retired state park supervisor, So this story is from a while back. Every Monday, we had to turn in weekly reports at our headquarters. There are a lot of things we're supposed to turn in then, but the important one was our weekly financials. That is, account for how many camping permits we sold, rentals, picnic or beach passes, etc., and how much money we took in. We did one for each day and one for the week. I was known as being OCD about them, so mine were always right, and I'd often walk other park supervisors or assistants through any issues they had. On this Monday, I turned in my reports, no problems, and started putting our supply order into the truck. That's when my boss came out and said, "Hey, Sendax, can you stop by Dee's park on your way back? She can't print out her finances." I replied, "Yeah, I'll see what I can do." The reason I was asked is that I used to be a systems admin and owned a computer shop before this, and our people were notorious for slow response times. As a result, I frequently got called first to see if I could fix it. I didn't mind, because Dee was not just a friend of mine, she'd been my boss when I'd started, and I'd learned a lot about running parks from her. I stopped by and Dee was getting frantic. She told me that everything had worked until yesterday, and while she was able to put the information in, the system wouldn't pull up the report page for printing. I told her to show me what she did. She pulled up the browser to access our reporting system, and right away I saw the problem. "Why are you using Chrome?" I asked. Dee replied, "What? What do you mean? I just clicked on the icon to do my report," she said. Now, I have no problem with Chrome or Firefox, but the official browser was Internet Explorer. The system we used for reports had browser-specific scripts, so you couldn't use any other browser. I explained this to Dee, and she growled. It turned out that yesterday her daughter and grandson had come for a visit, and while Dee had been out taking care of something, her daughter had decided to upgrade the computer by installing Chrome on it. Of course, one of the things it does is to ask if you want to make it the default browser, and she'd click yes, hence the difficulty in printing reports. It was an easy fix, I just had to change it back, which I did. I then said, "Now try it," to Dee, and lo, the report popped up. She thanked me, and I said, "No problem, glad it was a simple fix, but tell your daughter to not upgrade the work computers." I left the office and was headed to my truck when this woman came charging up to me. Late 40s or early 50s, sort of chubby, blonde, short hair, a Karen. "Are you the park supervisor?" she said. I'm a park supervisor, but not." That was all I got out. She proceeded to start yelling about how my park ranger had ruined her family's weekend. Now, this park didn't have a park ranger. She was talking about Dee. I tried to get a word in edgewise, but nope, she was on a tier about that B*TCH. I realized I was going to have to wait her out. She proceeded to tell me all about how Dee had ruined her weekend, while I started mentally adding up the various park rules and state laws this woman and her family had broken. By the time she wound down, I'd counted 5 park rules, 2 misdemeanors, and a probable felony, and thought that Dee must have been in a forgiving mood. She finally ended with, "And I want her fired," I said. "I can't do that." She yelled, "Why the hell not?" I said, "Because she's the supervisor of this park. I'm the supervisor of a different park. I can say that I wouldn't have ruined your weekend." She said, "Really?" I said, "Absolutely. If you'd been at my park, I'd have had the police in to give you tickets, and then evicted you. I'd have ruined your life, not your weekend." She stared at me for a second and said, "I'm going to call your headquarters about this." I said, "I'm sure you will when you get home," and then I smiled and in a cheery voice added, "Now have a safe trip." She huffed, turned around, and stormed back to her car. I waved as she left. As her car was disappearing, I heard laughter coming from behind me. Dee had come out of the office and had tears in her eyes from laughing. She said, "I can't believe you just did that." I said, "Well, I figured I should show her just how much worse it could get." Dee said, "I always thought people from my former park were exaggerating when they called you the supervisor from hell. I thought you were really easygoing, but I can see now why they called you that." I said, I don't like doing it, but when the situation calls for it, well, I release my inner jerk. We laughed, and I went back to my park. No, the Karen never called, or if she did, it never made it back to us.